Well, welcome to the Ransom Church. As we get started, did you know that your life has been changed by Zacharias Jansen? Now, anyone here actually know who that is by chance? I'm guessing most do not. Jansen invented the microscope in the 1590s. Prior to his invention, scientists believed crazy things. Many scientists believed that the entire body was just filled with blood. And so their diagnoses and their cures, their suggestions were based on what very little they knew about the human body. And as we look at them now, they would seem incredibly primitive to us. But the idea that there might actually be living cells inside of our bodies wouldn't even have made sense to their minds. They couldn't have comprehended. And yet there was this whole unseen world within each of our bodies that the microscope then allowed us to see. Now, these cells had always been there. These living organisms had been there, but they were unseen, and yet they were just as real as anything that we could see. So, with that, welcome to week 3 of our series, Soul Shift. You might be wondering what that's about. Well, in this series, we are addressing the reality and the need for believers to go beyond just checking a box in their faith, okay? If we're ever going to live a life in line with kingdom values, if we're ever going to be set free to be who God made us to be, it will take a series of shifts in our soul. Just kind of as a review, in week 1, we talked about the shift from me to you, from a life that is curved inward upon ourselves to a life where we truly learn how to think of others first. Last week, Pastor Paul did an amazing job talking about the shift from slave to child, this shift of identity and how we see ourselves no longer as just slaves to God or even hired hands, but as heirs to the kingdom. But today is one of the hardest shifts for any of us to make. I think partly because of what it takes to make this shift. See, to shift from me to you, that takes surrender, that takes humility, and that doesn't come easy. To shift from the idea of a slave to the mindset of a child, that's all about a shift in identity. It takes a shift in how we choose to view ourselves. That's not easy either. But today's shift takes one thing, pure and simple: faith. Today's shift is the shift from seen to unseen. Now, this isn't talking about going from being in front of everybody and getting all the attention to living life behind the scenes. This is different. This is a shift in values from embracing temporary things to fully embracing the eternal truths about this life. The shift that we're talking about today is a shift from living for the things of this world to actually seeing our purpose in this life as fulfilling part of God's greater eternal plan. It's about realizing that this life, it's not about me at all. It's actually about everything that is to come. It's not about here at all. It's about eternity. And that can be a really, really hard thing to do because, let's be honest, we can't see eternity. We might get glimpses in different things, but we can't see eternity. And we're currently living now. And the world we're living in now, I mean, wow, okay? It is something else. So let me ask you a question. What do you see when you look at the world today? I'm guessing there are probably a lot of opinions on this, which is why I'm not going to do open mic night right now. I don't know how encouraged or discouraged you are by the state of the world that we are living in, but I can tell you this. I can guarantee this. Your perception of the world around you right now may or may not be true. It may or may not be accurate, but your perception is shaping your reality. In some cases, far more than the truth, if you let it. So let me tell you a story to illustrate what I mean. It's the story of, we'll call her a not so young woman, okay? If you want to know how old she was, it's simple. Whatever age you are, she was older than that. Okay, so one morning after a particularly rough night of sleep, she woke up, she walked into the bathroom, she looked in the mirror, she immediately started screaming and ran to her car, drove herself straight to the ER, met with the doctor. She told the ER doctor frantically, "When I woke up this morning, I looked in the mirror, my hair was all wiry and frazzled, my skin was all wrinkled, I looked super pale, my eyes were bloodshot. What in the world is wrong with me, doctor?" To which the doctor replied, "Well, one thing's for sure, it's not your eyesight." Okay? Here's my point. Most of us don't have a sight problem, we have a perception problem. The way we are seeing the world around us right now may or may not be completely accurate. That's not the point. Because we don't need a shift in what we're seeing. We need a shift in our perspective. We need a soul shift. When you look at the world around us right now and you only focus on the temporary realities you can see, things are likely going to feel really hopeless really fast. But if we can begin to shift the way that we see the world, not just focusing on the seen, but instead focusing on the unseen, not with a temporary earthly perspective, but with the understanding that there is a bigger eternal picture at play, it will completely change not only what we see, but how we choose to live our lives every single day. In fact, let me go as far as to make this bold statement. The shift from a temporary to an eternal perspective will literally change everything about your life. It will change the way we process what we see happening around us. It will determine our level of peace and contentment or lack thereof. It will actually lift a great burden from our shoulders because it's easy to become overwhelmed with the temporary. The daily demands of life consume all our energy. We wake up and we are immediately inundated with opinions, okay? Every topic you can imagine, every social media platform, it is constant and it is unavoidable. And that's before we ever even get to the own realities of our lives. Like our jobs require tons of attention. Our physical bodies need constant care and maintenance. The state of our finances causes emotions to fluctuate up and down like a roller coaster. The pressure to compete, to keep up, it's overwhelming. And if we let it, the temporary worries of this world will own us. And when people get overwhelmed, it's not unusual that they turn to religion and they begin to look to faith for answers, which is good. The only problem is we begin to blend earthly and eternal perspectives. So we get into Scripture, we read the eternal promises of God. Unfortunately, we start to apply those eternal promises to the temporary world we're living in. And so we put our faith in God and everything's great, but then life happens and we begin to question God's faithfulness because we read His Word and we think it means that He's always going to fix the temporary. We always want Him to protect us from pain here, but that's not what He promised at all. In fact, we read in John chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus says, I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. But then He says this, but take heart because I've overcome the world. Now, He's not making an earthly promise here. Jesus' earthly promise is that we will have trouble. That's the promise He made us. You're going to have trouble. But when He talks about overcoming the world, He's not talking about how He's going to make this life comfortable or this life all better. He's talking about how He's going to bring this world victory over sin and death, and He's going to make the eternal promises available to us when we put our faith in Jesus Christ. The call of Christ is a call to live in this world, but to understand that we are not of it. To recognize that we are now aliens and strangers here in this place. We are primarily citizens of another kingdom, an eternal kingdom that is far more real than this temporary earthly kingdom that we're living in. His call is for us to shift from seen to unseen, because there will come a day where we realize that this life that we live really does find all of its value in the eternal. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, all that is not eternal is eternally useless. So let me ask you this question. What is your perspective on this life? That brings us to the first of two passages we're going to look at today. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 is where I want you to turn. If you're using one of our Bibles, we'll be on page 695. We're going to be in Paul's letter to the Corinthians here for a bit, his second letter to the Corinthians, and then we're going to jump back into a story out of the Old Testament that serves as a perfect example of what we're talking about. Okay, so Paul has been writing about living out this new covenant. He's been writing about the beauty of the covenant and how that compares to the imperfection of who we are as humans. So 2 Corinthians chapter 4, starting with verse 7. Paul writes, we now have this light shining in our hearts, but we ourselves are like fragile clay jars containing this great treasure. This makes it clear that our great power is from God, not from ourselves. You see right away that picture of something eternal and valuable put into an earthly clay pot. Paul goes on to describe the battlefield that is this life. He says in verse 8 through 10, we are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We're hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we're not destroyed. Through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies. Let me put it this way. Sometimes the life of faith can be hard. It's not easy just going through, putting your faith in Jesus and all the motions. Suddenly, when you put your faith in Christ, suddenly things are not all joy and rainbows, If we judge the value of our life, or if we judge the level of God's faithfulness based only on what we see happening in the world around us, our faith will be very hard to maintain at times, won't it? Paul goes on in verse 16, he says, that is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, are wasting away, our spirits are being renewed every day. Now, I'm 42. I can see 43 from where I'm at. Anyone struggling with getting older? I mean, honestly, right? Now, Paul is wasting away in large part because of his life and the amount of persecution he's facing. But can we be honest about the reality? Like it or not, all of us are literally wasting away right now. Some of us feel it more than others. Okay? Or at least our bodies are wasting away for sure. It's hard to deal with the realities of getting older, and yet everywhere I look in my life, I can't ignore the signs of aging. My brain thinks that I can still do things that my body is reminding me I can no longer do. Okay? There's more gray in this awesome mane that I have going on here than there was a few years ago. I have 2 kids who are uncomfortably close to college age. All around me are signs I am wasting away. I'm getting older. Comedian Brian Regan sums it up pretty well when he talks about getting older and gaining weight. So enjoy this.
Unfortunately, we are unable to air this clip online due to copyright restrictions. If you wanted a good laugh, you can actually find it on Netflix. Search Brian Regan, Nunchucks, and Flamethrowers. I mean, the title itself is pretty epic. It is rated PG. You can find the clip between 1 minute, 20 seconds and 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Again, Brian Regan, Nunchucks, and Flamethrowers. But let's go ahead and get back into the message.
Now, I know what you're thinking right now. I don't know whether I should feel more awkward that Pastor Phil showed that in church or that it's super true, right? And that's the reality. We are outwardly wasting away. So how did Paul actually live this out? He understood that there is more reality in the eternal than there is in the earthly. For Paul, this is all a matter of perspective. He writes in verse 17, for our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. Some translations say, for our light and momentary troubles. Now, maybe that's not what you're feeling in your life right now, but listen, in the perspective of eternity, our earthly difficulties diminish in their importance. This is in no way minimizing the reality of the suffering that any of us are going through or of anything that anyone is facing in life. This isn't making light of any of the things that we face. It's simply understanding that eternity in heaven far outweighs it all. I mean, Paul did not have an easy life. If you read about Paul's life and all that he went through, his troubles were anything but light. And yet the resurrection of Jesus Christ so changed how he viewed this life that as severe as his struggles were in the seen world, in comparison to eternity, to him they seemed light and momentary. Faith enables us to take a long view of the life we're living, and it gives us context for the bigger picture. In Soul Shift, they put it this way. It says, faith does not speak things into existence. It simply sees what is already in existence, though still unseen, to those who live by sight alone. Paul goes on in verse 18 to put it this way. He says, so we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. He says we fix our eyes on the unseen. How do you do that? How do you see what's unseen? The only way for that to happen is for a soul shift to happen. As I was studying, I love how one commentary put it. It said it this way. It said, the experiences and circumstances of your present life often painful and perplexing, are what are visible. But these are merely phenomena in the passing parade of the fallen age in which we're living. That's a very beautiful way of saying they're temporary and he's eternal. If you choose to fix your eyes on what you can see right now, it will not take very long for you to lose heart. And this approach is actually the approach that our world rewards. In the book Soul Shift, they go on to say this: our culture tends to treat those who only believe in what they see as if they're the smartest. Those who have the least faith in the unseen, only having faith in what can be touched, are esteemed as the most intelligent. Sooner or later, we all have to make the leap of faith, and sometimes smarts aren't enough. There are plenty of smart people and not so smart people who have no faith in the unseen. It doesn't matter where you are in that spectrum, we all need a shift from seen to unseen. From living in this world that's temporary, but is not our ultimate reality, to see in the bigger picture. And so many people are depressed about how sad life is right now. And even believers, we're so depressed about the state of our world right now, and we're losing sight, we're forgetting how temporary this life is, and that we are living for eternity. So how do we experience that soul shift? How do we move from seen to unseen? We'll turn to 2 Kings chapter 6. If you're using one of our Bibles, flip back to page 223. To give you a little background on this story, these two kingdoms are at war. Israel, God's chosen people, the kingdom of Israel is at war with the kingdom of Aram. And every time Aram gets ready to attack, it seems like the king of Israel can predict every move. Aram, everywhere Aram goes, Israel's one step ahead. And the king of Aram starts looking for a spy in his own camp because he thought, how else? There's got to be somebody feeding this information to the prophet, to Elisha. There is no spy. God is giving Elisha inside information. And Elisha, the prophet, is passing that on to the king of Israel. So when the king of Aram realizes what's happening, Elisha becomes a target. He sends an army to find Elisha and capture him. Well, one morning, Elisha's servant wakes up, puts on the coffee, opens the door to get the morning paper, and realizes they are completely surrounded by the army of Aram. We read in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 15, when the servant of the man of God got up early the next morning and went outside, there were troops, horses, and chariots everywhere. "Oh, sir, what will we do now?" the young man cried to Elisha. That's what a life looks like when it's focused on what is seen. This is where most of us are as a nation. This is where most of us are as believers. It's where most of our faith ends. When we can't see what God is up to anymore, we lose our faith. How many of you have looked at the life we're facing right now and you found yourself feeling so overwhelmed, you think it's just too much, I give up, I can't do it. Maybe you've walked away from faith. Maybe that's why you're watching church from home. Maybe you're not coming to church at all. How many have honestly found your faith wavering simply because of what you can see? This servant had to be wondering, well, what can we do? How are we going to get out of this? Hoping that Elisha had a plan to fix the situation. Instead, Elisha says something totally unexpected. In verse 16, he says this: "Don't be afraid," Elisha told him, "for there are more on our side than on theirs." Where? Elisha's servant is completely perplexed. This shift from seen to unseen is so profound. There's so much going on around us all the time. There is a battle going around us right now that you cannot see with your physical eyes, but through faith, we can believe that the battle for the souls of mankind is more real than anything we can actually see, right? It's those eternal things that matter far more than anything that's happening here on earth. Now, I'm not saying we should just ignore the world and just wander around like we don't know what's going on. We need to stay focused on what's happening in this temporary life. We need to give it at least a measure of attention, but we cannot allow the things of this earth to blind us to the greater eternal realities that are far more real than anything that we're seeing. So Elisha prays a prayer for his servant. It says in verse 17, then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, open his eyes and let him see." The Lord opened the young man's eyes, and when he looked up, he saw that the hillside around Elisha was filled with horses and chariots of fire. Listen, they were always there. He just didn't see them. Imagine you were that servant that day. God answers Elisha's prayer. The servant looks out. He sees the entire hillside covered with angels and with chariots of fire. How would your life change that day if that were you? Or let me ask it this way. How would your life change in the world we're living in if you got a glimpse of the eternal realities that are around us? It would change everything. So how do you shift your perspective from seen to unseen? I think there are two things to take note of. Two things in this story that were unseen but ever present and that can be present in our lives as well. Two things we need to lean into in faith. First, we need to lean into God's presence. When Elisha's servant looked outside that door, all he saw at first was the enemy on every side. And panic set in, and fear began rising when he let what he could see overwhelm him. Now, we have the advantage of perspective. We're outside of Scripture. We can read the Bible. We can know if we want to through God's Word that He's always with us. And yet, how often Christians, believers, how often lately have you found yourself losing sight of God a bit and forgetting His promise that I will never leave you, I will never forsake you, that I am with you till the end of the age? I think in our hearts, you know God is there, but in light of all the things that you can see in this world, our picture of God has started to get a bit blurry. It's not that we don't have faith, we have faith, but our faith has begun to get a little bit out of focus. That's why church is so important. A powerful way to refocus the lens of our faith is by practicing things like prayer and worship and fellowship. It's why we had worship night last week. It's why we're doing the things we do. And the greatest way to bring focus to our faith is simply to focus on the life of Jesus. To get into the Word and focus on the life of Jesus. Paul writes in Colossians 1:15 that Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. Following Jesus shifts our perspective. The more time we spend looking at Jesus, the more we try to follow Jesus' example for our lives, the more the unseen world will become real to us, the more that we'll experience God's presence in our lives, and the more that we'll realize that the world right around us is not what we see, that there is actually a world around us where the poor in spirit actually do inherit the kingdom of God, where the meek inherit the earth, the poor are rich. That world is more real than our political system. It's more real than COVID. It's more real than the things that are dividing our nation. The world we see around us every day is not as real as the eternal realities. When we begin to see God's hand at work in the world, it begins to shift our perspective and to shift our values, and it changes our priority in life completely. My question to you this morning is, what do you see when you look at the world? Do you only see a desperate and broken world? Or do you see God at work all around you every day? When we make the shift from seen to unseen, we discover that we've never been alone. As G.K. Chesterton so aptly put it, he said, if the risen Christ suddenly appeared at this very moment and stood behind you, what would you do? And then he adds, He is. Which leads to the second thing. We need to lean into God's protection. Not only His presence, but His protection. Psalm 34 verse 7 says, for the angel of the Lord is a guard. He surrounds and defends all who fear Him. This is a reminder that we are in a spiritual battle. It is real. And that is what Elisha's servant got a glimpse of. It was like there was this veil between this world and the unseen world, and God lifted that veil for just a moment and gave the servant a peek between the earthly and the spiritual realm, allowed him to see the army and the fiery chariots completely surrounding the enemy. We see mention of this in the Garden of Gethsemane. When Peter draws his sword to protect Jesus and to prevent his arrest in the physical realm, cuts off a guy's ear, Jesus stops him, indicating, first of all, that he needed to be arrested in order for God's will to be done, but also pointing out that protection was available if he needed. He said in Matthew 26:53, Peter, don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us, and He would send them instantly? That's the reality of God's protection. How would it change your mindset as believers to understand the real battle that is raging around us is bigger than this world, and to know that God always has it under control? To know that God's angels are surrounding and protecting us. How would your perspective be different in this world if you lived with an awareness of God's protection in your life today? That doesn't mean as believers we'll never struggle as if God put some invisible force field around us. Think of it this way. This is not a promise God will save us from all struggle, but that he will be with us through all struggle. In the Old Testament, God is often compared to a mighty fortress. A mighty fortress is our God, right? When the Israelites took refuge in a fortress, the enemy wasn't like, well, let's pack up and go home. There was still a battle to fight. But the protection of the fortress gave God's people the advantage. That's a picture of God's protection. There is a spiritual war raging around us right now. It is raging for the souls of humanity. And as a child of God, you can rest assured that God is with you, that no matter the hardship you face, he is your fortress. The reality of this unseen protection will shift things when it comes to how you fight these very real battles. Okay, you can read 2 Kings, or you can't read 2 Kings 6 like we did without getting a sense of this. Just a year ago, none of us could have imagined life today. We couldn't have made this up if we wanted to. It would be impossible. But here we are. And guess what? He's with us. He's always been with us. And he's always been in control. Whatever you face, he is with you. He is your fortress. And he is your rear guard.
So what do you see when you look out the window? When Elisha's servant looked out that day, he couldn't see God's hand at work anywhere. He could only see their very big problem. Maybe you can relate to this way of thinking. But what if there's more going on than what you can see? My prayer for us is Elisha's prayer. Lord, open our eyes. Help us see your presence and protection surrounding us. Help us to recognize your presence in our lives.